I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the President of the United States finally lands in Israel. We'll reveal the ins and outs of his Israeli itinerary, and join us as we take a look back at the history of American presidential visits to the Holy Land. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. All right, we're starting out our show again with a live look at the sacred Western Wall in Jerusalem, where U.S. President Donald Trump made a visit earlier today. He's the first sitting president to visit the holy site, but we'll get into that later in the show. So let's get to the main news of the day. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a host of government and military leaders are rolling out the red carpet today as U.S. President Donald Trump makes his first ever visit to the Holy Land. In another historic milestone, Air Force One flew directly from the American leader's first stop in Saudi Arabia to the Jewish state. Trump was treated to an official ceremony on the tarmac of the international airport in Tel Aviv, where he was greeted as Israel's true friend. Israeli President Reuven repeatedly thanked his visiting counterpart for coming, as well as his plans to usher in a new era of peace in the Middle East. Rivlin concluded by saying, "God bless Donald Trump and his wife Melania, and God bless America."
We can work together towards a better future. We shall continue to do so together, Mr. President. Bruchim habaim leIsrael. Welcome to Israel.
After issuing his own very warm welcome, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu hailed Trump for his powerful display of friendship to the Jewish nation and underscored Israel's quest for peace.
The peace we seek is a genuine and durable one, in which the Jewish state is recognized, security remains in Israel's hands, and the conflict ends once and for all. Mr. President, you just flew from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. I hope that one day an Israeli Prime Minister will be able to fly from Tel Aviv to Riyadh.
In his own opening remarks, U.S. President Donald Trump said he is honored to be in Israel and is vowing to defeat radical terrorism and bring peace in the region.
On my first trip overseas as president, I have come to this sacred and ancient land to reaffirm the unbreakable bond between the United States and the State of Israel.
U.S. President Donald Trump has now visited Jerusalem for the very first time, starting off with a state visit to the official residence of his Israeli counterpart, Reuven Rivlin. The president enjoyed an exceptional and rare view as the Marine One helicopter ferried him over the Jerusalem hills to the heart of the Israeli capital. Within just an hour of arriving in the country, Trump and his wife were escorted inside the stately presidential hall. After signing the prestigious guest book for state leaders, the two men held a brief press conference.
Now today being in Israel is just very, very special for us. So we expect to have some very interesting talks.
We are praying for peace and we are pushing for peace for the last 100 years.
Trump also voiced his view that regional threats posed by Iran may lead to wider alliances between Israel and the Arab world. He then repeated his demand that Tehran immediately cease its sponsorship of terrorism. During a tour of the presidential grounds, Trump planted a tree in honor of his visit. America's first couple then stopped by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, worshipped by Christians as the Old City site of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. Trump then made history by becoming the first sitting U.S. president to offer prayers at Judaism's holiest site, the Western Wall. He even tucked his own written note within the ancient stones that stand on the same ground where both biblical temples once stood. Before leaving Saudi Arabia, U.S. President Donald Trump gave an important anti-terror speech to 55 Arab and Muslim leaders, but many Israelis are concerned that he didn't use a historic opportunity to advance regional acceptance of the Jewish state. In fact, Trump barely mentioned Israel at all, even though the majority of those attending his Riyadh address adamantly refused to recognize Israel's right to even exist. The president instead focused on the need for a united fight against Islamist extremism. He did brand many of Israel's enemies like Hezbollah and Hamas as terror groups and condemned Iran's role as a key source of funding and support for terrorism. But Trump didn't even cite Israel while listing world nations victimized by terrorism. Altogether, he only made 3 brief mentions of the Jewish state, first by saying Jerusalem was his next stop. Later, he said cooperation among the 3 monotheistic religions could lead to peace, including between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and he then slammed Tehran for vowing to destroy Israel, America, and other countries. Trump's critics point out that when his predecessor Barack Obama made his 2009 Cairo address to the Arab world, he spoke about Israel 23 times and directly condemned calls for its destruction as deeply wrong. Obama also specifically called on the Palestinians to abandon violence. To be fair, President Trump will no doubt declare America's unwavering support for Israel during his visit, but there is concern that he neglected to encourage greater recognition of Israel during his address to Arab leaders. Joining us now all the way from the United States is Professor Alan Dershowitz, a world-renowned lawyer, author, and advocate for the State of Israel. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, let's begin with President Trump's visit to the United States. Lots of Israelis are claiming that Trump has missed the chance to push for peace where it counts following his recent visit to Saudi Arabia, where he gave an important anti-terror speech to Arab and Muslim leaders, but somehow failed to push for regional acceptance of the Jewish state. What is your response to his decision not to do so?
Well, I think he is doing so. I think he's doing so in private. I think he will do so in Israel. I thought the speech in Saudi Arabia was generally good. I wish he had pointed a finger at Qatar for supporting what he correctly called a terrorist organization, Hamas. I hope that he means it when he says there will be an agreement among all the Emirate countries no longer to support terrorism, whether it be Saudi Arabia sending incitement messages through its schools and curriculum, or Qatar basically funding Hamas and much of Hamas's terrorism. But generally, I thought his speech in Saudi Arabia was presidential and balanced and pretty good.
Now, to start the peace process, Trump did say that he's not going to push for a settlement freeze or have any preconditions before the 2 parties meet. For that matter, do you think this will bring the peace process to a standstill, or how do you think the Palestinian Authority feels about this?
Well, I'm hoping that he will actually press the Saudi Arabian proposal, not the peace plan, but the Saudi Arabian proposal, which says that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates will begin to have recognition, obviously writ small, with Israel, allow Israeli planes to fly over, allow telephone lines to be established, allow business deals to be done openly. They're being done, obviously, now below the surface, in exchange for Israel freezing settlements beyond the security barrier deep in the West Bank and doing something for Hamas and Gaza in terms of humanitarian aid. I think such a step forward, even though it's a small step, would be a move toward possible a larger step. So I'm hoping that would be accepted by both sides.
Now, Professor, what do you think about the president's statement regarding Iran?
I think it was a very positive statement. He said and he emphasized that the United States will never, ever allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. That's very different from the policy of the Obama administration, which basically says, hey, 10 years, 12 years, the deal's done, we're not going to do anything. I think if this is American foreign policy, that Iran will never, under any circumstances, be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, it's actually in the deal. The deal says Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to acquire or develop nuclear weapons. That should be made a firm part of American foreign policy. I think Trump's statement was a good first step in that regard. I think Congress ought to pass legislation saying we interpret the deal as meaning that Iran will never develop nuclear weapons, and we give the president authority to stop that from happening if Iran ever seeks to develop nuclear weapons.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Alan Dershowitz. We'll see you on Wednesday for your weekly show with ILTV, Ask Alan. The Israeli Security Cabinet has just approved a set of economic measures for the Palestinians on Sunday, and the Prime Minister's office says this was on U.S. President Donald Trump's request. The measures, including opening the Allenby Bridge crossing between the West Bank and Jordan 24 hours a day, and the construction of industrial zones in the West Bank, were approved without controversy. The move to rezone land in Israeli-controlled Area C for Palestinian use was opposed by the cabinet members of the right-wing Jewish Home Party. Although sources claim that none of these steps change the status quo or core issues, it's easy to see why the concession-wary Beit Yehudi would view this as a concession of land. Still, Prime Minister Netanyahu must be glad he doesn't have to sell his right-wing coalition on another settlement freeze. Hamas has been quick to reject U.S. President Donald Trump's labeling of the group as a terror group during his Riyadh address. A spokesman for the Islamist Palestinian group immediately issued a statement not only filled with fiery rhetoric against Trump, but also the Jewish state.
تصريحات الرئيس الأمريكي ترامب بخصوص حركة حماس ووصفها بالإرهاب هو قلب للحقائق، تصريحات مرفوضة. فالإرهاب هو إرهاب الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الذي يرتكب المجازر والجرائم اليومية وجرائم ضد الإنسانية بحصار قطاع غزة وقتل جماعي في الضفة الغربية والقدس، وبالتالي هذا انحياز كامل للاحتلال الإسرائيلي ويؤكد على المسار الخاطئ للسياسة الأمريكية بخصوص شعبنا الفلسطيني ومقاومته المشروعة.
Another Hamas official, Mushir al-Masri, says Trump's categorization of Hamas as a terror group reveals he's not going to be a fair mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because he clearly is aligned with the enemy's policies. Most Western nations recognize the Islamist Gaza rulers as terrorists following the group's repeated vows to eliminate the Jewish state and suicide bombings and other attacks that have killed hundreds of Israelis. Joining us now from rainy New York City is ILTV correspondent Ron Jacobson. Thank you so much for joining us, Ron. Now,
hey, Dasha.
Ron, how are Americans viewing U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Israel?
Well, if you blink, you might not know that he's in Israel because it depends what news channel you're watching. If you're watching CNN or MSNBC, everything they're talking about is about the Russia probe and everything that is awaiting Donald Trump when he comes back to the U.S. If you watch Fox News, you see gavel-to-gavel coverage of everything just like you would be on Channel 2 Israel.
Now, what's interesting is, do you think that leaking of Israeli intelligence will have an impact on Trump's state visit here in Israel at all?
I think this is already water under the bridge between Israel and the U.S., and they're trying to get some things done, especially with the Palestinians at the moment. Israelis, I'm sure, have other means of getting over leaks like that.
Now, here's our final question for you. What is the atmosphere of the White House press corps that is traveling with the president?
So they've been a bit frustrated because there were no press conferences so far where they could ask questions. They want to ask questions, and they want to ask domestic questions because they don't really care about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, nor do they care what's happening in Jerusalem. They want to know about the Russia probe, about the FBI, and about the Health Care Act. So they're waiting like vultures to have Trump let them ask questions. Trump has been smart enough not to do it, as in not to ruin the triumphant tour that he has as his first international trip.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, ILTV correspondent Ron Jacobson. Now that we have a sense of how Americans are feeling about U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Israel, let's hear from Israelis. I hit the streets of Tel Aviv earlier this morning to get a sense of how locals are feeling on the ground. U.S. President Donald Trump has just landed in Israel. How are you feeling about that?
I don't know yet. Well, to be honest, I couldn't care the less.
Could we ask you a question about U.S. President Donald Trump? He just arrived today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, say hi to me.
I'm not a supporter of President Trump, but I feel like it's fine for him to visit wherever he wants to visit.
No comment.
He seems like a cool guy.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he's got some fresh new ideas, but I mean, personally, I would sincerely doubt that.
I don't know. I don't really like him.
He's like a crazy clown in Israel, you say.
I don't see how he can make any difference, but good luck with that. I'm not against it.
Excuse me? Could I ask you something? No. Could I ask you guys a question about U.S. President Donald Trump? No, you sure? Joining us now in the studio to debate the true impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Israel is President of the Meretz Party National Assembly, Uri Zaki, Ari Fuld, the Associate Director of the organization Standing Together, and Likud Knesset member Amir Ohana. Thank you all for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so let's begin with the first topic on everybody's mind today, Trump's speech to Saudi Arabia, to over 50 Muslim and Arab leaders. What is your take on his speech? Israel was barely mentioned. It was mentioned, in fact, 3 times. What is the Israeli reception to this speech?
So, I think it's great that Israel wasn't mentioned by Trump. I think that this is the first time that an American president goes to really the core Islamic regimes and points a finger and says the problem is radical Islamic terrorism. I think that was shocking to me to hear. And I know Trump has no boundaries when it comes to shocking people, but I was really shocked in a good way with that. And truth of the matter is, there's really no reason to mention Israel there. There's no reason why Trump shouldn't mention Israel there.
Well, I think that Trump made a lot of effort to reach out to the Saudis and to also get the all these deals that he likes with weapons and other economical agreements. Even by telling the Saudis, giving them a kind of a free ticket, you're not connected to terror, while we do know that terrorists who committed from Al-Qaeda, who committed the 9/11 terrorist acts came from Saudi. With regard to Israel, I do think that, from the right-wing government, and Amir is probably going to speak on its behalf now, they should be concerned because such an alliance with Saudi and the rest of the Sunni Middle East means the president, who's already shows commitment to solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that means it will have a stronger interest to go ahead with that.
I think this visit is a great opportunity for the State of Israel. And when I'm saying this visit, I do also mean the visit in Saudi Arabia. Because not only it's a visit of the leader of the free world, the most powerful superpower in the world, in our region, but also it is a president still shaping his policies regarding Israel, regarding the Israeli-Arab conflict, and regarding the Middle East as a total. Because when we look at the Middle East and see, and we are watching closely to the uprising of the Shiites headed by Iran, both by Hezbollah, by the Shiite militias, Syria, and backed up by Russia, we do need the U.S. on our side.
What everybody is wondering, is Trump actually going to move the embassy, as he said in his campaign? Is moving the embassy even the right move for Israel, given the lashback that we could see from the Arab world? What is your take?
So I think that, of course, the vision is that all embassies should be in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Nevertheless, I think it's unrealistic to believe that even an administration headed by Trump, who was the champion of the settler movement and of the right in Israel, would do that so easily. I don't think he will do it unless it's on a background of an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement.
Does the party really think this is going to happen? What are the emotions on the ground?
I think the major difference between President Trump's and other former U.S. presidents and many, many European leaders is that he realizes 2 basic facts. First of all, the Israeli-Arab conflict did not begin at 1967. So the idea that if only we withdraw to the 1967 borders, we'll have peace has no grounds. Second, the Israeli-Arab conflict will not be solved in Washington nor in Brussels. It will only be solved or not be solved here by the Israelis and the Arabs, because we are the ones that would have to either live or die with the consequences.
I agree with Member Knesset Ohana. I just want to mention something. It's not 70 years, because we only reunified Jerusalem 50 years ago.
No, but Jerusalem, even from 48, was not recognized by the world. That's why all the embassies are in Tel Aviv.
Okay,
but we had embassies in Jerusalem.
It's true.
Hold on. But we didn't have control of Jerusalem in 48. But what I'm saying is I think there's a much bigger picture here. And again, the world has not adapted to the truth yet. In other words, the truth is Jerusalem has always been the Jewish holy city. It has never been a Muslim holy city.
Oh, you're coming
and,
to that today.
Yeah, and therefore it's time to take on the truth. I understand
I
diplomacy is
wouldn't say
impossible.
always, but for the past 3,000 years anyway, because Hebron was
Right,
first.
so I think it's time the truth comes out.
Well, the question is, will Trump actually be able to make this happen? And
if I knew that answer, I'd put a lot of money on that bet.
let's put
Any
this way.
bets?
I think we have a full agreement that we hope so. Right?
I think that's
Really,
fair.
I hope that peace will come, of course. Do you think only one side of the political
as President Trump himself told Bibi Prime Minister Netanyahu in the press conference they had in Washington a few months ago, he said, and you have to make difficult compromises as well. You know that, Bibi. Now I'm quoting him. The compromises will have to be given up on lands. You won't be able to do that.
I didn't hear that in the president's
No,
speech.
but that's a compromise that he's talking about.
Listen, we have to wrap this up, but if you would like to hear these two lovely men fight it out, just tune in on Thursday for
Israeli Frenemies.
Israel Frenemies. All right, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After a long day of meetings, the Israeli Prime Minister and U.S. President Donald Trump have finally had the chance to sit down for a meeting at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. No surprise, they're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran. Of course, President Trump has just come from Saudi Arabia, the Sunni rival to Iran's bid for regional dominance. Saudi Arabia and Iran are on opposite sides of the conflicts in Syria, Yemen, and Bahrain, and their opposition to Iranian hegemony appears to be pushing them towards Israel. Trump has some harsh words for the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which he says gave them wealth and prosperity and an ability to continue with terror. This is a big change from former President Barack Obama's deferential stance. That's not all. Trump says that the Arab countries are realizing they have common cause with Israel on the Iran threat. Is this why King Salman of Saudi Arabia is reportedly on board with Trump's plans for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement? Reportedly, Trump and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi have plans for a peace summit that will include Prime Minister Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Business as usual, except that according to diplomatic sources, Saudi Arabia has expressed interest in directly participating in the summit. After the meeting came to an end, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu hosted Trump and his wife Melania for dinner at his residence. But the private dinner apparently wasn't for public eyes. U.S. President Donald Trump is finally in Israel, and while it's a pretty big deal, he certainly is not the first American president to have visited Israeli soil. So, in honor of the visit, let's take a look back in presidential time.
The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by IDC Summer Ulpan, open to everyone.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. U.S. President Donald Trump has finally arrived in Israel for his first ever state visit. So today's word is naturally Nasi, which means president in Hebrew. In the Bible, each Israeli tribe had its own Nasi who brought offerings to the tabernacle. The literal meaning of the word is an exalted person, but it can also be related to the verb latzet, which has the same root and means to bear. So as you might guess, the word Nasi implies that a president bears responsibility for his people. Now, here in Israel, there may only be one Nasi, but let me tell you, everybody acts like they're the true president. What can I say? Israel is a country full of leaders, or at least people who think they're leaders. But hey, there's nothing wrong if each person feels responsibility for his community, right? So here's to everyone being their own version of a Nasi. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be partly cloudy with a low of 69 or 21 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow is expected to be partly cloudy with a drop in temperatures and a high of 76 or 24 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.59 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for watching.